Hello, everyone. I'm Kristen Miller-Zohn, Curator of Collections and Exhibitions at the Lauren Roderick Museum in Laurel, Mississippi. And I'm here today with Philip Jackson, who's an art professor at the University of Mississippi. And we're going to be talking about his work for the show Collections Interventions, Mississippi Collegiate Art Faculty Invitational. Before we get started, I just want to thank our sponsors of the exhibition, without whom it would not have been possible, Community Bank and Sanderson Farms. So welcome, Philip. How are you today?
I'm great. I'm great. Thanks for having me. It's good to see you, Kristen.
You too. You too. So we scheduled this exhibition. We've been working on it for a few years, and then we opened it up, and a week later we had to shut the museum down because of health concerns. So, and we have not been able to have an in-person celebration of the exhibition yet. So we're doing these virtual conversations with the artists to introduce our public and would-be viewers of the exhibition to the artists and their work. So thank you so much for joining us today.
It's my pleasure.
I'm hoping you can give us a little bit of background about your self-biography, what brought you to be an artist.
Yeah. So, my parents were involved greatly with the ministry, and so my father was my pastor for all of my life. And so when he was preaching, a lot of times I'd be drawing, and it was sort of my way of thinking through things and communicating. And so it just sort of became one of those things that that I knew, I guess, at a young age, that it was something that was very special, or a way that I communicated or saw the world. And so as I grew up, I found that it was something more than just that. It was a way of thinking and a way of seeing, and that was very unique to me. So through high school, I continued to develop all those things, and then finally went to seek my degree at the Columbus College of Art and Design in Columbus, Ohio, where I received my Bachelor of Fine Arts in painting, and then went on to pursue my MFA at Bowling Green State University in Bowling Green, Ohio. Both of those places had incredible professors that a lot of what I know about painting, I do attribute to studying with them. One of the greatest professors that I had the opportunity to study with was Lowell Tolstead, and he taught at the Columbus College of Art and Design. CCAD is what we call it. And he really mentored me and took me under his wing, and really helped me to understand what it takes to be a realist painter or a realist artist. He's an incredible realist. He draws with color pencils only, and was a big influence. And then when I went to grad school, I went to study with Dennis Wojciech, and also study with Charles Canwisher, both of which they are realists in their own right. Incredible. Dennis makes large-scale paintings of still life, but takes objects that are usually small and makes them monumental big. So very different in that realm. But I had a great experience studying with all of them, and they were a huge help.
Did you know that you wanted to paint realistically, and that's why you chose those two schools with those professors, or did that come as a result of those professors being there?
Well, that's a good question. I always thought realistically, and I didn't know it was really a thing. I just thought everyone, my perception of art was very limited. I mean, I didn't go to a lot of museums when I was young. My parents weren't aware of a lot of what art was, and so Norman Rockwell. And artists like that, that was the best to me. I mean, that was the sort of the pinnacle of what art was. And so I always thought that, making realist imagery was, the way that one would try to establish himself. And it wasn't really that I tried to be that. It was just natural for me. I mean, it was just something that I thought very clearly about. When I look at things, I see the details versus the overall. So when I was in drawing one, my teachers hated me because I wanted to go straight for the detail and not go for the overall image, which is now I know is very important, and what I try to teach my students. But as I was there, I found their work, and it just overwhelmed me of what they could do with such limited means. And so I was interested in from the very beginning.
Great.
Yeah.
So when you got out of school, what did you do?
So after I graduated with my MFA, I went back to my parents' home and built a studio in my dad's pole barn. And beautiful northern light. I had it all done and ready. And my old professor from CCAD calls me and says, "Hey, would you like to teach 3 painting classes and a drawing class?" I'm like, "Yes, that would be great." And all the whole time when I was in grad school, I had no intentions of teaching. I enjoyed it while I was there, but my intentions were becoming a professional artist, and I'd already had a gallery that was giving me shows, and I was somewhat successful with that. But there was something that happened when he called me. It was an immediate yes, and I didn't know where that came from. But I'd already committed, so I thought, well, I've got to go do this now. And so I came back to CCAD and I taught for a few years. And then I was an admissions officer, and that's really where I was able to travel and find galleries and get my work represented.
All right.
Yeah, so that was a wonderful opportunity. Got to see a lot of wonderful places and get my work out there. But then through all of that, I applied to the University of Mississippi, and the rest of my teaching history is history.
When did you get there?
So a friend of mine got married in 2006. It was July, a hot July in Mississippi, and my wife and I came down here, and it was just brutally hot. We were in tuxes and dresses, and I looked at her and I said these words. I said, "As long as I live, I will never live in the state of Mississippi." And so 2 weeks later, I literally get a call from the University of Mississippi. I'd forgotten about my application. It was something that I was, a colleague told me to do. You need to apply. So I applied. They called me and they said, "We're going to bring you in next week." I get here next week and they said, "We're not going to hem haul around. We're going to offer you the job on the spot. We want you to come." And I'm like, well, I got to talk to my wife.
Right.
But this was one of those things where I never intended to come to Mississippi, but we've been here since '06. It's been a great tenure here. I mean, I've been a tenured professor for several years, and I'm now going up for a full professorship this year, which I hope will happen by August. Everything is looking that way.
Right.
Yeah. So I mean, and it's been great. I've had a wonderful opportunity to work with great colleagues. I mean, just very talented, and they love what they do. I love working with them. They love our students. Our students love us. It's just a great atmosphere to work in.
Wonderful. And actually, two of your colleagues there, Lauren Cardenas and Virginia Rugen Chavis, are also in the exhibition, and we've had conversations with them this week too. So
oh, great.
Those out. So University of Mississippi is well represented in the exhibition and in these conversations.
That's great. That's great.
So I want to tell everyone kind of how we worked on this exhibition. The Lauren Rogers Museum has such an amazing permanent collection, and I'm always trying in our exhibitions to highlight them, highlight the pieces. And so I asked professors from around the state who teach at colleges and universities to come and tour the museum and meet each other and find a piece that spoke to them in some way and make a work in response to that piece. And then now we've hung those pieces side by side in our gallery. So you chose Concord Grapes by John Frederick Peto. And I was hoping you could tell us why you chose that particular.
Sure. I went through the whole museum and saw, I mean, I was really surprised, honestly, of the collection. The collection is so diverse and just well representative of a lot of talent that we've had over the years. In this painting, I actually walked past. I didn't even notice it when I walked in because of the nature of how you walk into the museum. And I was immediately struck by, I think it was a William Mary Chase, maybe a George Ennis painting. I love those painters. And then I navigated, throughout the museum. And I thought when I turned the corner, out of the corner of my eye, I thought I saw this painting, a Peto. And I was like, that's probably not a Peto. I just didn't expect it to be there. And so when I came back through, I said, I need to come back and just make sure. So glad that I did. So when I came back around into that room and I saw that painting, I'm like, that is a John Peto. I know it. That has to be. So I got up. Obviously it was. The one thing that I love about Pito's work, I've always been a fan, and I visited actually the museum in Island Heights, New Jersey. I was in a show there recently that they curated on Still Life. It was a Still Life Invitational. But I've always loved Pito's work because of the simplicity of what he can achieve through very minimal means. And in this painting, I think this is one of the strongest paintings I think of his work because of what I'm about to say. The painting is both abstract and realistic. It's realistic. We know what it is. They're hanging grapes. But if you can take the time to look at a painting longer than just, the first few seconds of determining that it's grapes and then moving on, if you can stay there with the painting, much like Giorgio Morandi's paintings, there is an abstract nature to this work that the painting becomes both three-dimensional and two-dimensional at the same time. So they become these it almost becomes like an abstract expression. So this could be as much of a Franz Klein as it is a Pito. I mean, they're these really stark, dark shapes that pop themselves from the background and create that contrast, that they flatten out and become these beautiful flat shapes. So that has always interested me about his work, of how he's interested in the shapes of a painting and the rhythm that these shapes take on, and the movement that takes on throughout the painting. So that was the thing that just pulled me in, and that's something I'm interested in my own work. I paint realistically, but at the same time, I'm very interested in the fact that this is an illusion. It's not real. It's an illusion of what reality has, and so there has to be a new opportunity in a painting. It's not just about copying something. I mean, that's sort of the vehicle, but the true ending of a painting has to have something that lends itself back to reality that is different, or that makes you think about reality in a different way.
And I think this painting does it from the outset too, because even though you know that those are grapes and they're hanging, you don't come upon grapes hanging on the wall.
Right. That's right.
It's the conceit of the artist compositionally why those grapes are hanging on the wall in the first place.
Yeah.
And so that's already kind of the artist putting his mark on those grapes.
Yeah.
And then they are painted and turned into these abstract shapes that
Yeah.
you're describing.
Yeah, well said. That's absolutely true. That's great.
So I'm going to show your painting now.
Okay.
Transitory spaces. Can you describe this for us?
Yeah, so this is part of a series that I've been working on for several years called it's a series called Transitory Spaces, and it's a series that I've I guess developed from I'm very much interested in the idea that the environment that we live in, as everyone knows, is continually changing and evolving. I mean, every second. We don't see that change so directly every day. We see it over a period of time. Some days it changes pretty drastically, whether a person is born or a person leaves this walk of life. That's a drastic change. But there are so many things that happen in between that when I'm putting these objects together, I'm trying to bring the viewer to a place where they can see the whole stage, all of the stages presented together. And so when you look at this, you'll see these are all muscadines. And I picked, I don't know, maybe 40 to 50 muscadines. And this is a fruit that I wasn't aware of until I came to the South, but they love them here. And they say either you hate them or love them. And I tried them. I don't love them.
Have you had the jelly?
Now the jelly is great, but
you know what the other thing about the jelly is? Apparently, it takes so many of these grapes to make that jelly, and it's so hard to make that if someone gives you muscadine jelly, they love you.
Yes. Well, I've had some people that love me, or maybe they just wanted to see if I'd like it. I don't know, but but I've heard the same thing. They told me the same thing. They had buckets and buckets to make one little jar. But they're very unusual and they're so beautiful. But I picked so many of these, and I have a still life box that I was probably present in the picture you had of me, where I set up everything, and I have sort of like a theater stage where I have multiple lights from every angle. yeah, so that's where I set everything up. And when I'm setting them up, I'm looking for things that will bring out the characteristics of the objects. And so in the painting, you'll see that there's like there's 4 or 5 different muscadines, and they're all in different stages of life. So one, where it's become, you know, where the fruit is finally matured to the size it's going to be, but the color indicates, you know, that it's still very green and very new. And then each one of them is at a different stage of life. And so what I had to do was, as they would sit in my box, I would take pictures of them, you know, every couple of days and record, you know, each change. And so really, this doesn't exist in reality. I pulled together, you know, several photographs to make this happen, to make one you know, one setup to be to seem as though, right, it is one setup. And but it's really about the sense of light. And that's the thing that also attracted me to Pito's painting, was like that just piercing sense of light. That's how we see things. That's how everything is being revealed. And it also indicates a source of life. And so, like all of these objects in my paintings, I usually use it coming from the left or the right, but usually from the left. And they appear as though they're kind of being drawn to the light. They're navigating or gravitating toward that direction because of the source of life. But yeah, this is a really interesting painting. It changed quite drastically as I painted it. Some of the things that were in the beginning stages that I intended didn't happen, and new things arose that I thought were really interesting, like the little sprouts off of the branches weren't intended, but as I was painting it, I kept seeing this thing as it growing while it's sitting there. So I thought, why not just make it look like it's still trying to, you know, sprout and pull its extremities toward the sky and toward the light.
Right.
Yeah.
There are two things you said remind me of Dutch painting, 17th century Dutch painting. First of all, having things that couldn't have existed all together in one time.
Right.
So like the still life painters who would paint flowers from every season in one bouquet to make the most beautiful bouquet possible. And then also the fact that your light comes usually in from the left reminds me of Vermeer interiors.
Yes, well, I'm a big fan. It's obvious, I suppose. I'm also a big fan of Adrian Quart. He was a Dutch painter, not very well known, but in every major museum, they usually have just a jewel. I mean, they are jewels. And that's another thing about my work, that I've always remained in a more intimate size. I remember when I saw his work, and I saw Chardin's work, and I saw Morandi's work, and they had some of those works next to really big pieces, but they were big to me. I mean, they were big pieces. And they can hold their own. I think it's really important that, you know, a lot of people think that, a lot of people think that the size of a painting determines the impact, and that is so untrue. Because those paintings, like a Vermeer even, they're like a magnet. I mean, they are a vacuum. I mean, they just pull you in. And once they get you into their world, I mean, your periphery is filled with everything that they've made for you.
Right.
And that's a big experience.
So this is an installation view of the two works hung together. And can you give us the dimensions? Do you remember the basic dimensions of your painting to give people?
Yeah, it's I believe it's 11 by 11 inches. So that's pretty small, you know. So that makes Pito's painting what, 8 by 5 inches, something like that.
Yeah. So yes, so maybe easy to walk past the first time because it's not big when you see a big, huge gallery full of paintings. But once you see it, it's very, very arresting. I want to go back to this slide so people can see these side by side. Can you talk a little bit about how you use the background in your work, and if that in this piece was in any way influenced by Pito's background?
Yeah, you know, seeing these side by side, I had not noticed it until just right now. But there are some similar breaks. Maybe his was on a stucco wall or some kind of concrete wall where there are like patches that may have fallen off or have decayed or whatever. You know, I didn't even, yeah, and I didn't even
Kind
notice that, but it's
of weird.
happening. Yeah, you know, and it actually happened as a happy accident in my painting. I was as I always do, I often, in between layers, I will sand some and rub the painting to remove any kind of debris. But I removed one little part and this warmth came through and I'm like, oh my, that's really beautiful. And so I kept rubbing and kind of, kind of kept pulling it off and I loved it. I thought it was just, it kind of talks a little bit about what's behind or what we can't see, that has the same narrative that's going on with present in the objects. And I feel like this is the same thing in Pito's work. You know, it's this, it could be any wall, anywhere, but yet it does tell a sense of age or a sense of time or history of what had happened on that wall, which is the same narrative that's in the objects themselves. It's pretty
Right,
beautiful.
right. Well, it's a pleasure to see them side by side. I'm going to go back to the installation view. Could you tell us a little bit about the experience of working with the museum and meeting the other artists from around the state as we
Yeah,
put this
yeah,
exhibition together?
absolutely. It was such a wonderful experience. The only thing that I've ever had similarly to this, and it was still very different, was the Mississippi Museum of Art, where they have the Mississippi Invitational, and the juror comes to the studio. I think that is so valuable. When you came, you know, usually artists are used to sending their slides out, or excuse me, sending their images out, and then hearing back through a letter, and then sending the work out, most likely not being able to go to the show because it's too far, and then getting the work back, and then the line goes on the resume, right? But this was so different, and it was such a pleasure, like to be able to have you come in and talk and have discussions about painting, but having discussions about all kinds of things, and then the opportunity to come back to the museum and pick from the collection. I had never done that before, and I was a little leery because I thought, well, I can't really customize a painting. I just don't do that, you know. And so I thought, well, if it happens, it happens. Great. If it doesn't, then I'll just, you know,
Beg
I'm
off.
very, yeah, right. And, and I thought nothing lost, right? And so I came and I was so surprised when I saw that painting. I was so overwhelmed, and I did toss back and forth a while of what I was going to do until I found the image that I worked with, and I thought, this is perfect. This is going to go along without me trying to force anything, and it just was a natural process. I hope the museum continues to do it. I think it would be a great thing for our state, and for the artists that are represented. We have great talent here, and
We really do.
yeah, and our folks need to see it. I'm just thankful that you guys are. I know this was a lot of work, and it's sad that it ended the way that it did because all the work is not being seen as it should. But I appreciate, you know, everything that you did to make this happen, and all of your staff. I know they've worked hard to make this look great, and thank you for all that you're doing to even, you know, make this still profitable online. I think this is a great opportunity to talk about the work.
Well, and it's definitely much more in depth than a 150-word label, which I limited everybody to.
Right.
So thank you
Right.
so much for all of this extra information. And yes, thank you to the entire staff of Lauren Rogers. They do an amazing job of making the things in my head and in the artist's hands show up on the wall. So I
That's
appreciate
great.
all of their help. And hopefully, maybe we will still be able to have the public come and see this at the end of whatever is happening now. Hopefully
Yeah,
people will be able to see it in person, but if not, we will continue to make it available virtually.
I hope
Thank you
so.
so much, Philip. I really appreciate your time today
Oh, it's
and
my
all
pleasure.
your hard work for this exhibition and the beautiful result. Thank you so
Well,
much.
thank you.